Health is More Than Skin Deep, The Skin and Melanoma by Maya Leventhal. The skin is our largest organ, and it's arguably one of our most important. It's vulnerable but protective, as well as variable, and it plays a very big role in both our medical and our social lives. So the skin has many functions. First, it's a physical barrier to physical trauma as well as infection and pathogens. It also plays a role in homeostasis of water and body temperature through sweat. It has a role in vitamin D synthesis, which is very important for bone development and bone health, and has a role in sensation as well as communication. And all of these functions are a result of the complex structures that are underneath the skin surface. So for physiology of the skin, we have three main layers. The outermost layer is called the epidermis, and this is a tough layer made of keratinocytes and melanocytes, and it's going to even have its own layers within itself, where the younger keratinocytes are going to be near that bottom. As they age and become tougher, they're going to come to the surface and eventually be sloughed off. Next, we have our middle layer, or the dermal layer. This is a layer made of connective tissue, and it's going to include blood vessels, nerves, hair follicles, glands, and all of that is going to play a role in actually nourishing that top layer that I mentioned before. And finally, we have our subcutaneous layer, also known as the hypodermis, and this bottom layer is going to consist highly of areolar and adipose tissue. That's going to work to pad and insulate the body, as well as serve as an energy reservoir. And it's also finally going to connect the skin to any underlying tissues or organs. The special thing about subcutaneous tissue is that it's highly variable depending on location. So for example, we will have higher levels of subcutaneous layers in our abdomen and our thighs than we would, for example, on our scalp. So as I mentioned, that middle dermal layer is going to have glands. Sudoriferous glands, or sweat glands, use exocytosis, and they're going to come in two main types. We have our apocrine gland over here, which is going to secrete sweat to a hair follicle, and this sweat's going to be thicker, almost milkier, and it's going to come about in response to stress or sexual stimulation. We also have merocrine glands found over here, which are going to bring sweat to the skin surface. And that's going to be in response to rising body temperature. And these are going to be found all over your body, but they're highly concentrated in our palms, our feet, and our forehead. We also have sebaceous glands found down here. Those are responsible for creating that oil that's going to moisturize our skin and our hair. And finally, we have ceruminous glands, which are responsible for earwax, and they're actually a form of apocrine glands. And we also have mammary glands, which again are a form of apocrine glands that specialize in forming milk. So normal function of melanin, we have our stem cells, and we're going to form these keratinocyte-melanocyte interactions. And usually we will have one melanocyte for every 36 keratinocytes. But we also find this in our hair follicles, where the ratio will go down to one melanocyte for every 5 or 6 keratinocytes. So it's much more concentrated. And basically what happens is the melanocyte is going to load melanin onto melanosomes, which will transfer it to the keratinocytes, which will then spread it and disperse it into the cytoplasm. And those keratinocytes are going to secrete hormones, growth factors, cell adhesion molecules, and all of that is going to play a role in controlling the melanocyte growth. So there's two types of melanin. We have eumelanin and pheomelanin. Eumelanin is going to be responsible for those brown-black pigments, and pheomelanin is responsible for more of that yellow pigment. Your skin color is going to come about from the ratio of eumelanin to total melanin. And eumelanin is going to have higher photoprotecting properties than pheomelanin. And so that is the reason why people with fair skin are going to have a 30 to 40 times higher risk of developing skin cancer. So skin cancer comes about from ultraviolet light and their radiation, and what's basically going to happen is the UV light will mutate your genes or alter the genes, and mainly in those tumor suppressor genes, which are very important in preventing cancer. Once those are mutated, there's a lot of room for cancerous growth. And there's three types of ultraviolet light that I'm going to talk about. UVB light is going to enter that epidermal layer, and it's going to stimulate those melanocytes to create more melanin. So this is what gives us our tan. And it's usually going to last much longer than the others, and it'll come about in 1 or 2 days. UVA, on the other hand, is going to be that immediate darkening of the skin, and it's only going to last about a day. And finally, UVR. UVR is the strongest and the one that's associated with precancerous effects. And under UVR light, those keratinocytes are going to secrete those factors that I mentioned before, the growth factors, the cell adhesion molecules, and those hormones that are really going to influence that melanocyte growth. So there are three main types of skin cancer. On the top here we have basal cell carcinoma, then we have squamous cell carcinoma here in the middle, and finally melanoma. And I'm going to focus on melanoma. Even though it is the least common of these three, it is the most dangerous. So signs and common areas, it's usually going to be found on your chest, your back, or your legs, and that's because these three areas are exposed to sun a lot. It's usually going to come up as this dark black growth, but it can also be red and pink, so it's really important to be aware of that as well. And melanoma is going to have two growth phases. So basically, it will start with an epidermal spread or a superficial spread, and if you leave it untreated, it will begin vertical growth. That's when it's going to reach that dermal layer. And as we said before, that dermal layer is very vascular, so that's going to give that melanoma access to other parts of the body, and it's going to nourish it and let it thrive, and that's really what's going to let melanoma metastasize, and that's what kind of differentiates it from the other two cancers that I mentioned before. Once you reach that vertical growth phase, melanoma can be very unresponsive to chemotherapy, so prevention and early detection are essential. Knowing what to look for is very important, and having regular checkups as well. So in conclusion, I did mention that melanoma was the least common of those skin cancers, but it's actually very commonly diagnosed in America, and it's very deadly. So it's very important to limit sun exposure, which if you're anything like me, you like being out in the sun and at the beach. So when you are out in the sun, making sure that you are wearing that SPF and reapplying it is very important. And also, if you have a concern, if you see something that looks abnormal, talking to your doctor about it and getting it checked out so that we can make sure that we get that early detection and catch it before it gets to that vertical growth. The skin is our biggest organ, like I said, and it's very important to us. It plays roles in our everyday life, and so it's really important that we're making sure that we're taking care of it so that we're healthy and cancer-free. Thank you, and does anybody have any questions?